When did you switch to 8-string guitars?
8-string guitar, I started when I was 27 years old. When I was, after college, I moved to New York City, where I went right into being a professional musician. I was there 3 years, and I moved to Washington State. And when I got out to Washington State, I had a girlfriend then, and she was going to move out there to live on the land, on 10 acres of beautiful land with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, and we sort of didn't want to break up. And I said, okay, let me come with you. I'm going to leave New York, and I'll go out there. And there was, I actually got a job. I wrote to about 9 different colleges in the Seattle area to see if anybody had an opening for guitar instructor or guitar teacher, and they Pacific Lutheran University did. And I moved out there, got the gig, and I found out that there was a guitar maker living within a couple of miles of Pacific Lutheran University. His name was Timothy Olson, who's actually one of the founders of the GLA, is it called GLA? Guitar Luthiers of America? Guild of America, GAL, Guild of American Luthiers. He, the last I know, I think he's the editor of their journal and so on and so forth. And at that time, he was building guitars. I don't think he builds anymore. And I had read an article about Egberto Gismonti. Do you know that name? The Brazilian guitarist who plays 8-string guitar. Mm-hmm. And I was reading about 8-string guitar, and years earlier, remember I said I studied jazz a little? Well, I studied with 2 teachers who played 7-string jazz guitar with low A, Howard Morgan and Alan DeMoss, both in New York. At different times, I studied briefly with them. And I thought the low bass was really cool, and then I'm reading about Egberto Gismonti. And let me get my guitars right here, because I'll show you what the piece was. I was working on BWV 995, the 3rd lute suite, which is the original lute version is in G minor. There is, of course, the 5th cello suite, which is C minor. And on guitar, it's usually played in A minor. Well, that's the opening, as you would play it on a 6-string guitar. But on an 8-string, I looked at the score and I saw this low note. Yeah. Well, that was it. I wanted to play that. I wanted to play that note. And so I called up Timothy Olson and I placed an order, and he didn't have a long waiting list, and I think I had to wait 3 months. And the price was, back then, it was a pretty good price. It was, I remember that I paid $1,100. It was a Sitka spruce, bird's eye maple, 8-string guitar with a long string length, 660, and instead of mechanical tuning gears, it had the old pegs, like the flamenco tuning peg. That was the guitar. But I remember I went to his shop. He called me 3 months later. He said it's ready, and it was right down the road. And I remember when I hit that low note for the first time, I was an 8-string guitarist right in that moment. I've never looked back. You really, there's anything that you can play on a 6-string, on an 8-string setup this way. You can even, you can do Rasciano's drum. There's a way to actually, with the left hand, you can mute the string behind it. And I found out that it wasn't that hard to get accurate with the right hand also in doing that. So I have that, but I have that more on the...
So how's the guitar tuned?
It's from the 1st string to the 6th string. It's a 6-string guitar, and then the 7th string is a low D, and the 8th string is a low A. Now that's what I call the standard tuning that I use. Almost everything I play is in that tuning, because unlike a Baroque lute or something with strings that are off the fretboard, you can play you can figure the notes on an 8-string guitar, at least the way I have it set up. Now there are different ways of doing it. Paul Galbraith I believe has on his 1st string this A.
Yeah.
And I think he uses either B or A, and they probably change it around. You know, a lot of people change the tunings a lot. That I've read interviews with other 8-string guitars. But on the bass, I mean, I've heard people who only go down to C or B or whatever. And I don't like changing tuning a lot in an evening, because once you start changing the tunings, you're always sort of like the string is shifting out of tune. So I just really got myself to learn how to finger the notes more. It's, of course, for 8-string guitars, it's totally a personal preference on how you do it, and different people do it in different ways. But what I do is mostly that low D and that low A.
So you've owned 27 8-string guitars so far, right? With 2 more on the way.
Yes, I think two more are going to come on the way. The first one was Tim Olsen, and it was actually a nice guitar. I liked that guitar, but I didn't like the flamenco tuning pegs. And then somebody introduced me to Jeffrey Elliott in Portland, Oregon, who's a one of the great guitar makers. And this was back in the early 80s. That was one I think I got one in 80, and then one in 84, and one in 88. And the one from 84 is the cedar top, which is on my Centaur CD called the Baroque Style. That was a beautiful, that's the 8-string guitar I regret the most that I sold.
Yeah.
And the next one was the European Spruce Brazilian Rosewood, which was a very nice guitar too. That's the Lullabies, Reveilles, and CS, the CD that I did on Centaur. But I got into this thing of really wanting to try different ways of building. I was interested in, as I told you, when I was a kid, when I was like 9 years old, 10 years old, I had this teacher who built guitars. So I always had, you know, he taught me some things then about bracing patterns and different kinds of wood. So I just wound up going on a journey. I wrote an article a few years ago, which I sent you, called An 8-String Journey, which was going to be published in a magazine. I won't mention how it's out of business, so that didn't happen. Eventually, hopefully, I'll do something with that article. And it just became this journey that was self-perpetuating, because, first of all, I love having new guitars made. And any luthier who's listening to this right now loves to hear about guitar players who love having new guitars made. It's good for business. But it's just tremendous enjoyment for me. Plus, it was this exploration of what worked best as an 8-string guitar, because there are some differences. I'll just tell you a few little things that over the years that I learned to have done that helped me. And I'm not saying it's good for anybody else, but it certainly worked for me. Just some little things right off the bat, which was pulling the, can you see?
Not really.
I don't know if you can see the string spacing, but the string spacing between the 6th and 7th string, the first 6 strings, of course, is the equidistance string spacing. It's a little closer on the 7th, it's a little closer on the 8th, and the same thing at the nut. It's a little closer between 6 and 7 and 7 and 8, because it just it gave me a slightly easier way to get the hands functioning on an 8-string guitar. And also, I learned that the 7th and 8th strings, again, probably something you can't see, but on the, let's see, I'm looking at my screen there, you might be able to see that. That the 7th and 8th strings, the saddle is made in such a way that they're actually a good bit higher than the other strings, because they really need. In fact, I got a little buzz on an 8 just before. Right now, I should be able. I have to do a little reset, a little adjusting on this right now. Also, this is a new guitar. This is a cedar top East Indian rosewood guitar with a bracing based on Jose Ramirez III. It's actually, this guitar is a little bit modeled after a 1962 Ramirez guitar. This is made by the American luthier Darren Hippner, and I'll talk more about him a little bit, because he's built in the last 5 years quite a few guitars for him. We got into a great thing that's a continuing process right now. So there's just a few little things like that. Plus, the guitar makers themselves, one of the reasons I contacted Darren about building for me is, after a number of guitars that I had made, I realized I didn't want to have somebody build me an 8-string guitar and it was the first one they ever made, because there are, in terms of how you voice the top and thicknesses and this and that, there are some differences between an 8-string and a 6-string, you know, and I wanted somebody who had some experience, and Darren had already built 3 8-strings. And the other thing is, you need to find somebody who really is interested in building 8-string guitar. He thinks it's a great way to make a guitar.